What do you have to lose right now? I just think people are scared to fail.
Being able to understand what it means to have to wait, to be patient.
You're listening to the Yash and Company podcast.
Hey everyone, this is Yasanka Chalasani, or otherwise known as Yash, and you are listening to the Yash and Company podcast. So on this week's episode, I thought we could shake things up a little bit and actually do a little bit of reflection. So I think podcasts are great about putting out a ton of content, but when it comes to reflecting and being able to take in and drawing from the best of that, I think that's not something that a lot of podcasts do. So maybe that's something we can do on this segment. So on this week's episode, I thought I would compile a list of the top 5 life hacks that have helped me out in my own life from the first 10 episodes. And these are in no particular order, and I had a ton of input to choose from, but hopefully this subset of advice will be helpful to you as well. So let's get started. So the first life hack of sorts is from Danny Huizinga. Danny is a consultant, national op-ed writer, and also nonprofit CFO. He was on episode number 2. And one of the things that really stood out to me from his episode was he suggested putting your phone away for a lunch or a coffee. And he said to build this up to maybe a whole dinner, a whole afternoon, and maybe even up to a whole day. So this is actually something that I've done in my own life. And for those that know me, I basically have ADD. So this was really tough on me. I'm someone who's always on my phone, and guests are always telling me that I need to get off my phone. And so it's really embarrassing. And when I tried this out, this was a huge struggle at first. I was very fidgety, as you might expect, but I noticed that after the second, third, fourth time I did this over a lunch or a coffee, that I got very used to it. And I ended up actually not checking my phone at times for about 4 or 5 hours of my day. And that is something that I could have never seen myself doing in the past. So I think we all recognize that phones are a problem, and we have such a hard time finding a way to get off our phones. So I thought Danny's advice on getting away through a simple lunch or a coffee and building that up to a whole day was really helpful for me. Number 2 on the list is the fear of failure. Now, this was mentioned on a ton of different episodes, but number 7 with Marcus Stroud in particular, and number 1 with Travis Whitfield as well. And this was mentioned in the context that Marcus started a venture capital fund and Travis Whitfield started a pharmaceutical company. And when asked why others don't do the same thing that they do, they mentioned that in a lot of respects, it's the fear of failure. But one thing I noticed is that, me and you are probably not in the position to do some of these things. But at the same time, we do face a lot of situations in our everyday lives where we are scared to fail. I noticed that in my day-to-day, I'm scared to say hi to someone that I maybe not have met before, or to ask a question to someone that I really respect. And many times when you reflect on why that is, it's because you're scared of failure. So in moments where I do recognize that, I started saying, hey, I will force myself to say hi to someone. I will force myself to ask that question. And in doing so, I've found that it's actually become something I'm comfortable with. This whole fear of failure, whatever that thing or action is, I have become instantly comfortable within that. So, I'm not ready to start a venture capital fund or start a pharmaceutical company, but I think it's when we start with the little things, I think we can build up to the bigger things. Number 3 on the list is meditation. This was actually mentioned by Congressman Alan Steelman because that's what the entire episode was actually devoted to. But it was also mentioned by Shana Fowler and Marcus Stroud. And one of the reasons I love meditation so much is because I think one thing I notice is that people always focus on the past or the future. They're worrying about what they have to do tomorrow, or what their future is going to look like, or they're fretting about something that happened in their past life. But I think the only way that you can control the future or get away from the past is to control the present. And this is the magical question. So how do you control the present? And I think there's a lot of ways to do that, but I think one of the easiest ways that I have found in my own life, and some of the other guests have found as well, is to really be mindful. And I think one of the best ways to be mindful is through mindful meditation. There's a ton of ways to do this in your everyday life, but one of the things that we talk about on the episode with Congressman Steelman is there's a ton of great apps that can get you started in the morning, and they really help train you to be mindful, to control the present, so that you can get away from the past and to control your future. So some of these apps that we mentioned were Waking Up by Sam Harris, which I personally use, Headspace, Insight Timer, and Calm. So if you're looking to meditate, those are some great apps to check out and to start your practice. Number 4 on the list is by Danny Huizinga once again. And this was actually in response to a question I asked Danny when I said, Danny, you're one of the busiest people I know. You're a CFO of a nonprofit. You are a full-time Accenture consultant. And on top of that, you're also a national op-ed writer. So how do you balance all of this that you have on your plate? And Danny said that he actually blocks out 2 to 3 hours of uninterrupted time throughout his day. And he actually schedules that in. And this was a concept that he actually picked up from Cal Newport in his book, Deep Work. And so when I started applying this in my own life, I actually found that, that 2 to 3 hours that you have of uninterrupted time away from family and friends, without your notifications on your phone, without the email app that's buzzing once every 2 seconds, you actually can get a ton of work done. And in this 2 to 3 hours, I typically get work done that could have taken me about 4 to 5 hours if I was with people or if I was at a coffee shop being interrupted here and there. So blocking out time has definitely been a game changer in my life. And this has particularly been helpful in the morning time. So if I'm up by 7 and finding time between 8 to 10 where I know I'm not going to get bombarded, that has been the most helpful. And last but not least, number 5 on our list is by our dear friend, Dr. Neil Garg, who premiered on episode number 6. And on this episode, Dr. Garg, who is a nationally renowned chemist and professor, talks about conflict resolution, and specifically from his time at NYU, where he was actually a leader within the dormitories there. And so one of the things he says is that whenever he has conflict, he always assumes positive intent by the person. So this has really stood out to me because at first you realize that this is so simple, but it's actually really hard to do and to think about in the moment. So whenever I hear someone saying something negative about me, or I get a news flash about someone being accused of doing something wrong, I think we all have a tendency to think negatively about that other person. But we also recognize that maybe not at the moment, but in retrospect, that we don't know all the facts. So I think being able to assume positive intent allows you to step back and to really change the perspective of the conflict or the situation that you might find yourself in. And at a worst case, you're just a lot more calm when you approach the situation, and you really don't let the emotions really control that. And in a time when I feel like everyone is just so reactive, I think this quick mindset change of assuming positive intent can really make a big difference in our everyday conflict resolutions. So with that, I hope you guys enjoyed the top 5 life hacks from episodes 1 through 10. If you like what you hear, go ahead and subscribe or follow to the Yash and Company podcast on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. And if you don't mind, go ahead and go to yashandco.com and subscribe to our blog. Here you'll get updates about all things Yash and Company. But until next week, this is Yash signing out.